Hello, my name is Andrew, and today we're talking about the pros and the cons of the original Vivo Barefoot Tracker FG versus the updated version of the Tracker AT. So for a long time, I considered the Tracker FG to be the best barefoot hiking boot ever made, but then Vivo discontinued it, which made a lot of people really upset. And then they had the Magna FG for a while, which I also really liked, and that got discontinued too. And finally, fast forward to last year when Vivo came out with a new AT series, and I was really excited about it, but the one problem was the AT boots had this sort of like thick rubber here, and it really limited the flexibility. You know, they just felt kind of clunky, even though they were a lightweight boot. They just didn't really have much flex, you know? So I just sort of gave up on the AT series until this year when I got to try the updated version of the AT. And let me tell you, they have made some really good changes to this to the point where it's actually now better than the original FG. For starters, the toe box width is pretty much the same, but they've made it more squared off here compared to the original FG where it was kind of pointy near the tip. They've also replaced the rubber band with a leather one that's a lot more flexible, and it also helps in the front of the shoe too because it doesn't pinch your toes like the original AT did. Plus it's stitched to the sole, which is great for durability and water resistance, and the sole itself is also stitched all the way around. Unlike the original Tracker FG, which had a glued sole, I never really had any problems with it. There was no separation, but you know, it's always more ideal to have stitching because it just holds up better to more flexing, which is what barefoot shoes are all about, right? The AT series also has reinforcements for the grommets, which is important because on the older boots sometimes they could pull off a little too easily, but Vivo's still using their same top hooks, which I love. They provide this very satisfying pop, and they literally had the same exact ones in the original Tracker FG. And I just love how snappy they are because it makes it easy to take the boot on and off. And then also when you're tying the laces, you could get them loose or tight or whatever you want, and then you can sort of like lock it in on the top without having to hold the laces when you're tying the final knot. Also, the AT has 3 grommets here instead of 4 for the original Tracker FG, and that just adds a little bit more flexibility. Also has an extra strip running down the front so that the laces don't wear out the top of the tongue. And around the bottom, the sole of the AT just comes up much higher than the original Tracker FG, which is great for water resistance because although the original FGs were really watertight, I didn't have any issues. It is a glued sole, and water coming up over here constantly, even when it's really shallow water, can eventually degrade the glue. Both boots also have a full tongue gusset, so they're really easy to get on, and it also prevents water from getting in over the top unless you step in something really deep. But then the inside of the boot is quite different because the AT series has a thinner tongue and less insulation. I mean, there's not really any insulation other than just sort of the padding on the ankle, which feels nice. It's soft versus the original Tracker FG, which was very puffy. It did feel nice as well, but like this amount of insulation was kind of overkill in summer, so the Tracker AT is a lot more versatile. Personally, I prefer having an uninsulated hiking boot because you can always stack up socks, but you can't take insulation out of the boot when it's hot, right? Also, despite the fact that all the AT boots have this sort of slim profile in the back, getting rid of the rubber band here made a big difference in them not pinching my ankle. It feels soft, and you can see there's just a ton of flexibility. It's a very smooth leather, and I didn't have any like rubbing or pinching issues even just straight out of the box. And that was true for the original Tracker FG as well. It had a wider cut, but neither boot really pinches. Another difference between the two is that the Tracker FG was a little bit heavier than Tracker AT. They're both like a mid-weight boot and definitely a lot lighter than a traditional hiking boot, but the Tracker AT is just a little bit closer to that fast hiking category. In terms of the sole, the Tracker FG was 6.5 millimeters. It had some good flex, and this was one of my first barefoot trekking boots, so I was like really impressed by how different it feels from a clunky hiking boot. But the Tracker AT is also 6.5 millimeters, and now that they've gotten rid of that rubber band, it is even more flexible than the original Tracker FG. Here's a little direct comparison so you can see the difference between the two. One reason the new AT sole is more flexible than the FG is because the midsole is quite thin, and then a lot of the thickness is happening here with these dense lugs versus the FG where the midsole is a little bit more thick, and that made the boots slightly less flexible. But Vivo has come such a long way with the design of their soles. Like, it's kind of cool how the tread wraps around the outside of the boot so that even if you're tilting on a slope where the ground is uneven, it still gives you some really good grip on the side. Not as clunky. You know, sometimes if you have all one piece, it makes the boot really stiff. And then you've also got horizontal lines to add just a little bit more texture on really slippery surfaces. One thing they've kept the same though is that they always make this Vivo logo here out of a little bit denser material than the rest of the sole. But Vivo's rubber has gotten way grippier over the years, and you can actually hear it squeaking when you rub it against something else. Also, like the original FG, the lugs are more dense in the back because when you're coming down on your heel, you're usually dealing with sharper rocks. And then the front of both boots is a little bit more open for a grip pulling yourself up hills. But in general, all these little extra details and texture on the AT sole make it a lot more grippy than the FG. Like you can just see after a few years of use, it just got very smooth and polished because there wasn't much detail there to begin with the FG. This also reduced breathability for summer, and they could get pretty sweaty if it was like above 80 degrees. The Tracker AT on the other hand is not fully waterproof. It's just leather, there's no membrane, so that does make it more breathable. I think it's a more comfortable boot for wearing all day, and you can treat it with beeswax to get it pretty darn close to waterproof. And again, the sole wraps up much higher than the original FG, which helps the Tracker AT not need that membrane. Although one downside of a stitch sole is that you can potentially get a little bit of moisture coming in through the seams, but generally it's not that big of a deal. In terms of terrain, you can do just about anything with this boot. You can use it as a snow boot, you can use it as mud because there's a lot of space in between the lugs and the top. It's just darn tough in the back as well. These lugs are very dense, so it's been great for hiking on rocks and gravel and boulders. And overall, just like the whole thing is so flexible and lightweight and crushable that it has definitely replaced the Tracker FG as the king of barefoot hiking boots. And although there are other options for specific climates or specific terrains, you know, like the SG for winter slushy stuff, the Tracker AT is just one of those boots that you can use for absolutely anything in any climate, any temperature, any terrain, any speed, from doing long hiking to backpacking to fast stuff. And I think Vivo really nailed the colors and just the overall balance of like modern versus classic. That said, if you'd like to support the channel, you can shop the referral links down below, browse and filter more products with the shoe finder tool at my website barefootwear.org, or watch my zero drop transition video to learn more about barefooting. Finally, if you have a question about the Vivo Barefoot Tracker AT or about barefoot shoes in general, let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. Catch you next time. Peace.